Next time your wife gets mad about you, you simply can show her the book When Men Behave Badly, smile and say, honey, it's not me, it's evolution. Or just stop being a schmuck and behave properly. And the tension between those two advices is our topic today. Hi, and welcome to the show, The World of Roy Yosevich, where I host the most interesting and influential people from all around the world to discuss science, philosophy, religion, and artificial intelligence. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing and hit the bell button. My guest today is Professor David M. Bass. Professor Bass is a professor of psychology at University of Texas, Austin. His primary research focus on strategies of human mating, particularly the dark side of human mating, including conflict between the sexes, jealousy, stalking, intimate partner violence, and murder. He is the author of the great textbook, Evolutionary Psychology, which is a great introduction to this fascinating topic. Why women have sex, and even more, and most recent, When Men Behave Badly. This is a book that encapsulates 30 years of research and 3 years of writing. So, David, how are you? It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here chatting with you.
Okay, it's my pleasure as well. So I would like to start with my introduction with like the two advices or drawing a line between evolutionary psychology and your latest book. So evolutionary psychology basically says that some of our behaviors can be derived or explained via evolutionary processes. But this fact alone doesn't provide the moral justification for such a behavior. For example, men want to as many sexual partners as they can, but as David Hume says, one cannot derive out from an is, and this evolutionary behavior doesn't mean that this is the optimal behavior. Am I right?
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. And this is one of the, it's a very pervasive confusion that people make between explaining a pattern of human behavior and morally justifying it. And is does not equate to ought. People, commonly make this mistake. They think, well, if it's evolved, there's nothing we can do about it. It's, but these kinds of confusions and these moral justifications have been used historically, no matter what the causal origins are. So this person couldn't help murdering his neighbor because he grew up in poverty, or he lived in a bad culture, or he had bad parents, or in some cases had bad genes. So, I think we have to make a clear distinction between what exists and what ought to exist. And just by way of analogy, one illustration I use in the book is cancer. No one would say to a cancer researcher, oh, you're studying cancer, therefore you think cancer should exist and we want to spread cancer widely. No, we want to eradicate cancer, and so we want to understand the causes of cancer in order to eradicate it. And I make a similar argument in my book, When Men Behave Badly, that there are bad stuff, there are bad deeds that men do, and men have a monopoly on these bad deeds when it comes to the sexual violence. And so we need to understand the causal origins, the individual differences, the circumstances in which they're expressed in order to cure the problem.
This is immensely important because, again, like you said, cancer is a part of the evolutionary process, although it is bad. And again, something that they are also part of the evolutionary process can be also regarded as bad especially in the context of moral meaning. So let's start with, you use the word mating a lot, and you say that sex is only one part of mating. So what does mating encapsulate?
Well, mating is, the reason I use the term when I started studying it is because it encompasses much more than sex. So the topics that I've studied include what qualities do people desire in mates, what tactics do people use to attract mates, what are the sources of conflict within relationships? How do people keep mates or guard mates? How do people get rid of bad mates? And so there's a long series of actions, strategies, and behaviors that just the term sex doesn't do the trick. And so in fact, most of what I've studied is not sexual behavior per se, but everything around it. And as a sexually reproducing species, this is, of course, critically important. I mean, the selection of a mate is probably the single most important decision a human can make in their entire lives. It is the process by which we transmit our genes to future generations. And so if we were asexual, like some species are, life would be a lot simpler. But we are a sexually reproducing species, and so all those other things around sex, leading up to sex and in the aftermath of sex, are critical.
But not only that it is critical, because of our organs or our mechanism of reproduction is vastly different. Women tend to be, for example, and we have many research that confirm this, much more selective than men, because a mistake, a woman or a female mistake in choosing the right mate will cost her much more than an error in male choosing his female partner. So it is very different how we treat each part of this tango, yes?
Yes, I would qualify that, though, by saying that is especially true with short-term sex, casual sex, or hookups. In long-term mating, the critical thing has to do with the amount of investment a man and a woman devote to produce a single child. And the minimum case for a woman is that 9 months of pregnancy. The minimum case for men is 1 act of sex. Okay, but men typically do a lot more than the minimum. And so in long-term mating, both sexes are very, very selective about who they mate with, because men's devotion of time, energy, resources, and so forth are just as valuable. And so men are very, very choosy when it comes to long-term mates, and women are as well. But when it comes to short-term casual sex, women maintain high standards. Men
David, this is so important, because we always get this Tinder statistics when men hit yes, I like 47% of the time, and women only 12%. And you say yes, but bear in mind, many men use or utilize Tinder as a base for finding a one-night stand. And if Tinder would have been another app for long-term relationship, men would be as selective as women. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
It's important to stress this difference.
Yes, I think that distinction between short-term mating and long-term mating is absolutely critical, because what you want in a mate shifts according to that temporal dimension. The tactics you use to attract mates differs, and exactly as you said, Tinder is primarily a hookup dating app. So there are other apps like Bumble, for example, or eHarmony, or that are more oriented toward long-term mating.
Okay, now let's start with the conflict, because we need to speak about conflict. Now, you say that sexual conflict is the root for conflict between the sexes. So like the basic thing underground is a sexual conflict, and you even say that even homicide is more often than not related to sex. Right? Why people kill other people is more often than not related to the battle between the sexes. So maybe after all, Freud was right, and the most important fuel of our life is not meaning, as other psychologists said, but sex. Or if I put it differently, maybe what you do is to give the scientific foundation to Freud ideas.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Freud was a genius in some respects in highlighting the importance of sex, which has been ignored by many psychological theorists. But in fact, he was very much influenced by Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. In fact, if you go back to Freud, his early formulation was that there were survival instincts and sexual instincts. And later then he combined the two and so forth. And as his theory progressed, he started to depart from a deep understanding of evolutionary theory. And so I give Freud absolute credit for highlighting the importance of sex, but he didn't quite have it right. And so our modern understanding of the evolved psychology that has resulted from sexual selection is much, much more sophisticated than it was in Freud's time.
But even now, you say that sex is still a main factor in human behavior. As like I said, I quoted you, even homicide, when people, when a person decides to kill another person, it is more often than not is related somehow to women or a sex battle. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, there are obvious examples where a man might kill a mate poacher, as I call them, an interloper who has sex with his wife. And there are some cases where men kill their wives or ex-wives who have committed infidelity or threatened to desert them. But there are many forms of homicide that are, the way I would phrase it is they're tributary to mating and sexuality. So for example, men compete over status. We evolved in small groups. All groups have status hierarchies. Position and status hierarchy is critical for mating success and for access to reproductively relevant resources in general. And so men fight and die and kill over status and reputation. And so you may think, well, that has nothing to do with mating, but of course it has everything to do with mating.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have to look at not just those things that are sort of immediately related to sexual conflict, like sexual infidelity, but also things that are tributary to things like status.
I think that Steven Pinker in The Blank Slate said that there are much more men without children than women without children, because the status rank is what enable men to spread the genes to the next generation. And women stand in a barrier and say, listen, I don't want your gene to pass on. So this is one of the things. Now, one thing that I
they don't think this consciously, of course.
Definitely. Definitely.
Now, they just like certain guys and don't like other guys. Yeah.
Okay, my wife does, but one thing that I love about evolutionary psychology is that it explains many of the jokes, many of the science between or underneath the jokes. Now, there is a famous Seinfeld quote that women need a reason to have sex while men need a place. And this is also part of this conflict. And you also wrote the book, Why Women Have Sex. So my question is regarding to this conflict that men or males want more sex than females, and you can see it every time you go to and visit the zoo, that the males are much more passionate about this activity. Yeah. How does this conflict manifest in other animals, or what is the meaning or the ramifications of this conflict in human behavior?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, every animal species has its own mating system. And so there's nothing that is really quite like human mating systems. But this sexual conflict, I argue in my new book, When Men Behave Badly, that this desire, this sex difference in desire for sexual variety is one of the root causes of sexual conflict, because it leads men to infidelity, for example. And another quote you mentioned, the Seinfeld, which is a great source of information about human nature. But there's a comedian, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Chris Rock, who said,
yeah, definitely.
Men are only as faithful as their opportunities. And now that's an exaggeration, okay? But men are vulnerable or susceptible to opportunistic, low-cost, low-investment sex. And so this is a source of sexual conflict. Obviously, it will disrupt the pair bond that a man and a woman have, but also it leads men to do all kinds of things in order to satisfy that desire for sexual variety, such as deceiving women, such as coercing women, such as sexually harassing women, topics that I get into in some detail in the book.
Yes, and we will get to that later on in our conversation. But there is another side to this coin, and the side that there is an old saying from the Jewish Talmud that even if a woman is in a marriage relationship, she still seeks for new potential mates. Now, you and Dantley actually confirmed this ancient wisdom in your backup mate. So it seems that backup mate is like the female version of infidelity. Am I right? And could you please elaborate on what backup mate is?
Yeah. So I have a section in the book on backup mates, and this is one of the things that I think will be disturbing to men who are listening to your podcast.
And haven't learned the Jewish Talmud.
And haven't learned the Jewish Talmud, but that women, even if they're in happy relationships, still cultivate backup potential mates. It's what I call mate insurance. So just like you have car insurance, house insurance, something can always go wrong.
It is crazy. I read it and it blew my mind.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you think ancestral humans and modern humans, something could always go wrong. So your mate could die, your mate could get injured, your mate could not come back from a war, or get seriously injured in a fight with other males, or your mate could dump you. And so people who failed to cultivate backup mates would have had to start the mating process from square one. And so I argue that this backup mate psychology is a critical aspect, especially important for women.
And it's, again, part of the conflict. I don't know what to do with this theory. It just seems like, your best friend is not actually your best friend, but I really don't know. And you said that in your research with Dantley, when the backup mate is dead, for example, is get killed, or like let's say that the backup mate is a neighbor and is dead, so the woman, which is in a happy relationship, is very, very frustrated because she just lost her backup mate. Yes. So
yeah. I don't think I use the dead, the backup mate getting dead, but the backup mate getting seriously involved with another woman. So if a backup mate of a woman gets married, for example, that takes him out of the pool as a backup mate.
Wow, this is amazing. Okay, so let's go on to short-term versus long-term relationship, because I think that there is like an egg and chicken problem here. And again, you just mentioned that there is a distinction between Tinder being a short-term approaches and other things that are long-term. And it seems to me, so it either that we need to be in long-term relationship because God told us so, or God told us so because there is something inherent in our evolutionary, in our biology, that strive to long-term relationship. We are one of the only, it's not only, but we are very unique in the animal kingdom as preserving a long-term relationship. So what are the evolutionaries, the biology sources of this strategy of long-term relationships?
Well, so they're fairly clear from a female perspective, from a woman's perspective, in that long-term mating, she has a partner who will provide, who will protect over the long term, both her and her children. The puzzle is why men would ever commit to it. And in my book, Evolutionary Psychology, my textbook that you kindly mentioned, I talk about 7 different evolutionary causes of long-term committed mating from a male perspective. So there are things like increased in assurance of paternity, that he is the actual father of the child. And that occurs in long-term mating. There's no guarantee in short-term mating. Of course, there's no absolute guarantee in long-term mating, but it's an increased probability that the man is the father. Protection of the children, increased survival of the children, etc. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So it is estimated that only somewhere between 3 and 5% of all mammals, of which we are one, have anything resembling a long-term mating strategy. The humans clearly do. We have adaptations for pair bonding, for attachment, for falling in love, for committing to one person over the long term.
And it seems that we're just eliminating the alpha male concept and just throughout Christianity, even throughout, you know, the hunter-gatherer, the tribal organizations, we just like, it seems like even ancient religions just make sure that every man gets to be with at least one woman, so it won't, so he won't be so much frustrated because we don't have these alpha male approaches in human societies.
Well, but we still do to some degree. So even in presumptively monogamous cultures where men are limited to one wife, they sometimes engage in serial mating. So have mating, breakup, divorce, remating, and then of course infidelity. So men are more prone to infidelity than women, and so yeah, there is a kind of reproductive leveling of the playing field with humans, but it's still the case, as you pointed out earlier, that in every generation, a smaller subset of males reproduces compared to a larger subset of females. Most fertile females end up reproducing, and we know this from the molecular genetic evidence that we can see that, and it occurs throughout the world, and it's still occurring in the current generation.
And again, but this I think proves that women at the final stage do tend to be more selective than men because they don't want to breed with every man. They are more selective even in the long-term relationship, no?
Well, I guess I would still take issue with that. So they are selective with respect to the man's status, his resources, and his commitment to her. And so this is creating a big problem in the modern world that I call the mating crisis among educated women, because more women than men are getting college and
very
university.
hard to find someone which is in a higher status than you if you are like the CEO, if you are very, very talented, very, very smart. Who can you find that which is smarter, wealthier than you?
Right. Well, what women want is equal or above them in education, intelligence, status, and resources. And so it's that mate preference for those qualities combined with the fact that there are fewer and fewer men now, wasn't true in the past, that have those qualities that women desire. So that's what's causing the mating crisis.
Okay, so I just wanted to move to the status question, but one more thing, because we just mentioned, you know, the difference between humans and the other animals. And now there is a famous song from the 90s, goes like this: "You and me, baby, are nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel." I guess that you are familiar with this song. It is right that humans and chimps are both very sophisticated mammals, but it seems that there is a huge difference between our sex lives. Roger Scruton speaks of almost a transcendental aspect of human sex life. So are we that different in the context of sex life than other mammals?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you compare humans to our closest primate relative, which is the chimpanzee, with whom we share more than 98% of our DNA, mating systems are entirely different. So in the chimps, most of the mating occurs when the female comes into estrus or heat, and it tends to be the dominant or alpha males who mate with her during that time. After that, they basically go their own separate ways. They don't have anything resembling a long-term mating strategy, but humans do. And so we have sex throughout the ovulation cycle, although there are some religions which you might be familiar with that do restrict it to when the woman is menstruating. But we have long-term mating and short-term mating and everything in between. That's why I say with humans we have a complex menu of mating strategies: short-term, long-term, serial mating, polygynous mating. And which aspect or which strategy that an individual human engages in depends on his or her mate value, the social circumstances, the legal circumstances in which they find themselves. So yeah, we are vastly different from chimpanzees and probably, and I would say all other mammals in the complexity of our menu of mating strategies.
I would say that all animals are reproduced and having intercourse, all mammals, but only humans also, in addition to all of this, make love.
Yes.
You agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, that love is, and I've written a couple of papers on love and do talk about it, that love is an emotion that evolved in the context of long-term committed relationships. And so,
and I would even argue again, and I would even argue that even almost the mechanics of making love is different that have sex. It's like a different procedure. If you're in a long-term, happy, loving relationship, it is something completely different. So okay. So the song is not correct. Okay, so let's move to the status hierarchy. I think that Jordan Peterson made famous the lobster theory, which basically said that hierarchy is here for like millions of years, and even lobsters suffer from the hierarchy status. And hierarchy is not that a social construct that you build. It is something inherited in our biology. And I would say, how do women rank? How do women know in which status the man is? Because they don't know his wealth, they don't know his intelligence, they don't know how smart he is. It's just like a guessing game. So how do women guess the man's status?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's a guessing game. They use cues that are statistically correlated with status. So one of the most important ones is the attention structure. So the people high in status are those to whom the most people pay the most attention. And so women can use the attention structure as a cue to status. And then of course there are other things which are, I think that's probably the most important one, but there are other things like his wealth. They can observe that in the modern world. Ancestrally, it would have been, is this guy reliably a good hunter? So that's what increases status ancestrally in small group hunter-gatherer societies. But in the modern environment, we have other things where cars, houses, possessions, which are imperfect indicators of status, but they are still correlated with status.
Would you agree that the metrics for evaluating status are different between men and women? So women seek status in 1, 2, 3, and men seek status in 4, 5, 6. So in different areas, it might be like beauty versus power or wealth.
Yeah. Of course, the qualities. And I recently published a paper on precisely this topic, that there are sex differences in what leads to high status or low status. And they are some of those things. And so for better or for worse, physical appearance or beauty is a more important component of female status than male status. So you look at, you can see this in look at rock stars. If you just took a photo of some of these rock stars, most women, if they didn't know who these people were, would find them really ugly and unattractive. But because they have status, that elevates their attractiveness. Yeah.
In almost every sports car that I've ever seen, there is an old guy next to a beautiful young lady. So and I want to even go further. would men consider intelligence as a counterfactor? I don't want my woman to be over intelligence. I don't want my woman to be over me. I want to be the dominant. I want to protect her. I want to be in charge. Therefore, dominant, intelligent women having more difficulties finding mates.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. And the way that I explain it is a controllability. So intelligent women are less easily controllable. They're less easily manipulable by men. And so part of what, I mean, men have evolved to be attracted to women who are high in fertility, but also women who they can control to some degree. And women who are more intelligent than them are going to outthink them, and they're going to be less controllable.
Because
that's not necessarily admirable, but it's just part of our mating psychology.
It seems like every page of your book screams out that, you know, the modern feminist theories about everything is equal and everything is social construct are not true. You can't read your book and say, yes, the sex differences are only a social construct or can be manipulated via education. It's like there is something much more profound underneath.
Yes, and I agree with that. I mean, this I call it sex difference denialism, and I think it's just absurd because the scientific evidence is very, very clear, and the meta theory of evolutionary psychology is very clear. So we only expect to see sex differences in domains in which men and women have faced recurrently different adaptive challenges over the course of human evolutionary history. In many domains, the sexes are very similar to each other. But as it turns out, in the mating domain, in the sexuality domain, the problems and challenges that men and women have faced have been profoundly different. And so we have evolved fundamentally different mating and sexual psychologies. And so to pretend otherwise is just, in my view, naive.
It's like the inherent conflicts. I always stated that a platonic relationships are like there is a saying in Israel that a platonic relationship are like BDSM. Although the two sides agree upon it, it might be okay, but it's still something weird. So there is no way of a platonic relationship because there is an inherent tension. And from there, I would like to move on to the dark side of your book. Now, in 1975, Susan Brown Miller stated that rape is a conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in state of fear. Again, all men keep all women in state of fear. And we hear this from extreme feminists that all men are potentially rapists. Now, this is an outrageous claim, but we hear it occasionally, more often than not. Now, and my question to you is, which men, under which circumstances, engage in which form of sexual violence?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so just on Susan Brown Miller, I think she was important in highlighting the importance of rape in warfare, because rape is a very common occurrence in warfare. However, the notion that all men are rapists or would be rapists under the right circumstances, I think is fundamentally wrong. And one of the things I do in my book is highlight the answer to your question, which is, what is the subset of men who are most likely to engage in rape or sexual assault or sexual harassment? And it's the dark triad personality traits combined with a short-term mating strategy. So dark triad is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, where narcissism, these are people who are of a grandiose sense of self. They believe that they are God's gift to women. They exaggerate or believe that they're more attractive, more intelligent, more successful than they really are. And importantly, they feel a sense of entitlement, and that extends to sexual entitlement. Machiavellianism is basically, as I'm sure all your listeners know, is coined from the the Italian advisor to a prince called, his name is Machiavelli. And basically that is people who tend to pursue an exploitative social strategy. So there's the liars, the cheaters, and so forth. And then the hallmark of psychopathy is lack of empathy. So most humans have an empathy circuit where we feel when someone is harmed, or a pet, an animal, a child, we feel a sense of deep compassion for the hurt that they experience. Psychopaths don't. It's like their empathy circuit is absent. And so you take this dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, and you combine it with a dispositional pursuit of a short-term mating strategy. This is
which circumstances, because you just answer which men, like the dark triad. Right. Now you're going to answer which circumstances, like in the pursuit of short-term relationship. Yes.
Yes, in the pursuit of short-term relationships, and when men are in a position of power and can get away with it. And it's actually a point where I disagree profoundly with some of my evolutionary psychology colleagues, who I respect greatly, who argue that it's loser males who are most likely to commit sexual assault. And I argue the evidence is actually the opposite. It's men who are in a position to get away with it, who are most likely to commit sexual assault. And so the newspaper cases, the prominent cases, the Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Jeffrey Epstein, I'm sure these have made news in Israel as well, I assume.
By the way, we have our own Jeffrey Epstein.
Is that right? Who is that?
No, like people in Israel, we have like a famous actor. We just got sentenced for 11 months in jail, and we had a president, Moshe Katsav, which was convicted for 5 years in prison. So it's like, the Me Too environment, beside doing, also did many good things in clearing all the bad atmosphere and say, listen, you cannot treat women like you used to treat women. And we actually, in Israel of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I think it was the same in the US, we didn't treat women as we should, or society, it's not me, I wasn't born then, but society didn't treat women as it should. And I'm not saying that society now treats women perfectly, but it was a very important procedure, or very important phase that we as a society need to pass. Okay, so now you answered which men, under which circumstances, but you still didn't answer which form of sexual violence. Is it only rape or stalking or other forms?
Yeah, well, it's primarily forms of what I call sexual coercion, which is a broader term that encompasses sexual harassment, everything from unwanted sexual attention through sexual harassment through sexual assault. And so that subset of men, dark triad and short-term mating strategy, they engage in all those things. They also engage in attempts at honest courtship, seduction, deception, and so forth. So these men are often very successful in the mating game, but they use sexual coercion when these other modes don't work. And so it's typically not the loser males, but rather the guys who can get away with it, that have these personality traits and mating strategies that are most likely to do it.
Okay. Now, another thing that you write in your book, and let me just quote, after reviewing voluminous data, I will argue that there is no compelling evidence that humans have evolved specialized rape adaptations. And indeed, some evidence flatly refuted specific rape adaptation hypothesis. So what is the rape adaptation hypothesis? No, it is hard for me to say, okay, but hypothesis. Thank you so much. And thank you, I'm sorry. And why is it false?
the rape adaptation hypothesis, this has been most heavily advanced by Randy Thornhill, who's a very respectable and intelligent evolutionary biologist, is that humans, like some other species, have evolved specialized rape adaptations. So the example that he uses is scorpion flies that have a specific anatomical feature. It's called a nodal clamp that is only used in the context of forcing other female scorpion flies to have sexual coercion or rape. Humans obviously don't have anything like that. We don't have any anatomical features for that. And so it rests with the underlying psychology. Do men have specialized design features that have evolved specifically to rape females? And it's a perfectly legitimate hypothesis, but I argue that there's currently no evidence for that. That is, for example, we know that men desire sexual variety. We know that men use aggression, but aggression is not rape specific. Men use aggression to steal, to mug other men, to go to war, etc. And sometimes use physical aggression in the service of their sexual goals. But that's not a rape-specific adaptation. It's a strategy that men use in a wide variety of contexts. So it's possible that at some point in the future, there will be evidence for specific rape adaptations in the human case, but we are far from that at the current point.
Now, let me suggest something different, and I won't use the word hypothesis because apparently I cannot say it. Okay. Now, in the area of Me Too, the most sold book is 50 Shades of Grey, and 50 Shades of Grey basically said, listen, the relationship or like the basic structure or the architect structure of man-female relationship is not between equals. There is like a dominant thing, one dominant the other, and we have also philosophers who also mentioned that, like Friedrich Nietzsche and others. So we might say, I'm just asking a question, that we are built because the relationship are not between equal to be more aggressive, more dominant, like in 50 Shades of Grey, and maybe, just maybe, rape is take this kind of behavior to the extreme.
Well, I would say that we have to make distinctions here. So on the 50 Shades of Grey, so when most people think of the term rape, they think of an ugly, drooling stranger jumping out of a dark alley and attacking a woman. This is not something that women are attracted to at all. So the 50 Shades of Grey is very similar to the Harlequin romance novels, a very popular genre of females, where they're attracted to guys who are successful, handsome, well-respected by everyone, and in the case of 50 Shades of Grey and these others, men who can have sexual access to any woman they want, but find themselves uniquely attracted to a specific woman.
But you ignore the violence part in 50 Shades of Grey. It's not just what you just said is completely true, but we have another aspect in 50 Shades of Grey, which is like the BDSM stuff.
Okay, well, I confess I haven't read it in detail.
It's like, forcing, it's part of, it's an act of violence over there. It's not violence, it's like an accepted violence, both sides agree.
Right. Okay, but that's the key point though, so it's consensual.
Consensual, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that is the woman is agreeing implicitly or explicitly that she is consenting to this agreement. And my understanding is that in 50 Shades of Grey, the woman actually signs a contract to that effect. And so that's different from the dark, ugly, drooling, unsuccessful.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I'm just asking, maybe this is derived from the same thing. Again, I'm asking a question. You are the expert.
Yeah. But what theme are you trying to highlight here?
I think that there is a claim that rape has nothing to do with sex. Rape is like a different thing. It has nothing to do with sex. And many people say, no, like stealing has something with money and other bad behavior. But if you separate, could you separate rape from sex? So isn't rape like a bad mean, a horrible mean for sex? Or rape is completely different thing that stems from different parts of the human soul?
I think a distinction has to be made, and I do in my book, between the sexual psychology of the male and the victim of rape. And so to say from the sexual psychology of the male that rape has nothing to do with sex, of course, is absurd. And interviews with rapists, they will tell you, except if they're coached by ideologues, they will say, yeah, I wanted to have sex with this woman, that's why I did it. But from the victim's perspective, it's not sex, because many or a lot of women conceptualize sex as in the context of an intimate relationship, a committed relationship. And so from a female perspective, it is an act of violence. And from a male perspective, it is an act of sex, and the violence is a means to get the sex. And so I think we have to separate out the perpetrators and the victim's sexual psychology in addressing that question. And so, and get past the ideology. The other important point, I think, on this issue is that people think that human behavior is motivated by one thing. They want to trace it to one motive. Well, it's often not one motive. I mean, there can be motives for sex, motives for power, and these often intermingle.
Okay, now it's important to state upfront that those behaviors are horrible, and we as society want to eliminate them completely. But again, just like you said that we do cancer research, this research is extremely important just for the sake of understanding those bad behaviors and eliminate them, hopefully completely from our society. So it's very important to state upfront.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I hope, that's why I wrote the book, is because I want to eliminate bad behavior. I want to eliminate sexual violence, bypassing a female choice, which sexual violence is fundamentally involved in. And we can't eliminate it without understanding the causes in which men are doing it and the circumstances in which men are doing it.
By the way, your book is devoted for everyone who has suffered from sexual conflict. So it's a very powerful thing. Now let's move on. We have like 9 more minutes. So I want to move on to the hardest questions. Would you think that evolutionary...
I thought these were pretty hard questions.
No. We are just more...
Okay, now we get to the hard ones.
Yes. Would you think that evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology leans toward any side of the political map, like progressivism versus conservatism, or is it mere fact and can be interpreted both ways? Now, I would argue that evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology lean more towards the conservatism side of the political map.
I disagree with that, but I have to take one break for 1 second, please. Just 1 second. Yes, I disagree. I think that evolutionary psychology is really neutral with respect to political orientation. And there are studies that have looked at the political orientation of evolutionary psychologists as opposed to standard social scientists who are not evolutionary, and there's really no difference. You find the whole spectrum from liberal to conservative. And so I don't think it really supports any particular ideology. Why do you say that you think it supports a conservative ideology?
I say that I think that sex conflict denialism, like you said, is part of the progressive approach. And since your book highly or specifically refute those hypotheses, therefore, it cannot be leaned toward the progressive side, because I think that the progressive side of the political map, or like the extreme progressive, cannot stand the fact that there are like inherent sex differences and that not everything is a social construct.
Yeah, so in that respect, I would agree with you, but there are also, and I don't know how it is in Israel, but in America, those who are on the right, the political right, the conservative end, are often very deeply religious, and they reject evolutionary theory, period. And so they reject.
No. So I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about that the extreme progressivism that cannot cope with the evolutionary psychology evidence or ideas, or what you just said. That, listen, men and women just behave differently in almost every aspect. And the last question that I would like to ask, it seems like there is an evolutionary of sexual morality, because the natural state is not like Rousseau says, but like Hobbes, is violence. Okay, from there we progress more and more to more regulation, less violence. From tribalism and religion provide many sex restriction, female modesty, male self-sex discipline, and the climax of those regulation is in the Victorian era. And from there we get downhill, less and less sex regulation, all the way to what we are seeing right now, that almost no sex regulation whatsoever, and sex out of wedlock is like an option. And my question is, if we eliminate almost all regulations, aren't we go back to the natural state, and by that we just enforce violence on the system? So not now, but if we just don't make any sex regulation whatsoever, wouldn't it be that in 4, 5, 10 years, we will see an increase in sex violence?
Yeah, I think not. So yes, their morals surrounding things like extramarital sex, of course, have changed dramatically over the last couple of decades. But there are also things like sexual harassment, where in universities and in businesses and in legal systems, we have now laws and policies against that form of sexual violence. And so yes, there's been a liberalization of attitudes towards sexuality, but a movement to regulate sexuality in, for example, in the workplace. And so I don't think we'll ever get to the point of that there will be more sexual violence. In fact, the trajectory is less sexual violence. And I think attention to these issues is absolutely critical. The causes of sex differences, and I agree with your point about sex difference denialism, is just silly from a scientific point of view at this point.
Wow, this was a hell of a roller coaster, and it is a brilliant book. Professor David Bass, thank you so much for joining me today on discussing this important topic. Your books are fascinating, and just, like you just have a giant lamp and you just show reality in a different light, in different aspects. So it's fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, and please keep on the important work that you do at the University of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for such an interesting and intelligent conversation about these topics, which are very sensitive.
Yeah, even for a religious Jew like me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, David.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.